back for episode 3. Very excited. A lot happened this week. Coming back after inauguration, it was the first week of Trump's presidency. So definitely a bit discombobulated from all that's happened in the last week and all of the executive orders that came out, but we tried our best to compile them. We're going to run through them quickly, just give our thoughts on them. But first, to start out, we were going to talk a little bit about the role of independent media at the current moment. So, Abby, did you want to say a few things about that?
Yeah, I feel like Colin and I have talked a lot about the rise of independent media. I actually wrote my capstone paper, which is called, or the class that I took in college, my capstone class is called A Republic If You Can Keep It. And I wrote it about the fall of independent news and like community news and how that's like destroying democracy and stuff. And the other day, somebody actually asked me if I thought that print journalism could make a comeback. And I was like, unfortunately, no, I don't even think like broadcast journalism is even mainstream anymore. I think that people are really wanting to hear uh, commentary from other people. I mean, I receive all my news that way. Uh, and I know you do too, Colin. So I'm glad we're
Yeah,
doing
pretty
this.
much. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely been interesting, especially since we obviously started out in print. It's been weird to kind of now have to take on a completely new medium just to kind of keep up with where the market seems to be. But definitely there's been a shift away from broadcast. Like you said, I think CNN laid off like 200 employees last week, and most of them on the TV side of things. And they're kind of refocusing back on their online website, written content as opposed to TV, it seems like, for whatever reason. We've also seen a bunch of like commentators go independent recently. Piers Morgan just, I think, moved from he had some contract with the Murdochs, and now he is going just to be on YouTube and other streaming platforms. We in the past year, I know Candace Owens left the Daily Wire and now went independent with a whole new podcast, and seems to have rebuilt her audience back pretty quickly. So that again speaks to the power that I think people are just gravitating toward people who they get a sense are honest brokers and people who will speak their mind, who aren't seemingly beholden to any corporate interests or any other interests. And obviously, like, everyone has their own personal biases, but the more upfront that I think people can be about those biases,
Hmm.
trustworthy that they are. And obviously, when you're attached to a legacy organization, it's kind of hard to unravel yourself from all of those interests.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like people have a lot of trust issues nowadays when it comes to the media, like now more than ever. And honestly, in a lot of my comms classes and a few poli sci classes too, we talked about how that trust within the media comes in waves. But it's really hard for me to see a future in which people really start trusting the mainstream media again. Like I'm reminded of when Sean Hannity like came out and actually was like, "Yeah, we knew that the election was fraudulent, yet we still broadcasted the opposite because like that is what their viewers would want to hear. Basically, like what are people doing for views and money versus like what is the truth?" Kind of thing that I feel like people are questioning all the time.
Yeah, I think like just the idea of being able to do what journalists do, but having your own control over all of the editorial side of things is a huge appeal as well. We've seen like in 2020, Megyn Kelly made the shift. We mentioned her a lot on this show because I do listen to her stuff quite a bit, but she made the shift away from first Fox, then NBC, and went independent, and now has her own show. And I think has kind of in some ways been a blueprint for what that could look like leaving mainstream
Hmm.
media and going out on your own. And I think she's been extremely effective in doing that. Um, yeah, do any other examples come to mind for you of people who've kind of like broken away?
Um, I feel like for me, I wasn't even really raised in like a house where I watched broadcast news. So I feel like once I started getting into news, I kind of gravitated more towards political commentators anyway, just because it was just so easy and convenient to look it up on like my little Apple podcast app. So no specific examples that come to mind for me. I'm always listening to things like, yeah, I recently started listening to some Megyn Kelly actually because of Colin. I listen to Ezra Klein. I listen to sometimes Candace Owens. I'll do Pod Save America. Like, I just really like to kind of go all around the political spectrum to make sure that I'm kind of touching the bases of everyone and hearing all the opinions and then being able to like kind of form my own just from everything within.
Yeah, and another thing that I've noticed, like, kind of wrapped up in this pivot away from the mainstream outlets is like there's been a huge number of defamation cases lately, which
Mm,
I think kind of speaks to the situation right now where like people are really sick and tired of the way that like the media portrays different narratives and who it kind of like chooses to hone in on and target sometimes. And so like there have been some very high profile settlements and payouts with ABC being sued by Donald Trump for things they were saying about him on air. I think they said that he was a rapist when in actuality he had been found liable for something, but it wasn't actually found liable for rape. There, he was never criminally charged with that. So just the wording that they were using around it was imprecise and inaccurate. So he was able to sue them, and rather than like go to trial, they just settled with him for $15 million. And George Stephanopoulos was the anchor who, you know, was the one saying this on air. And then there was a case with CNN recently where they had to pay out $5 million to a veteran who they had essentially portrayed as being involved in like a black market in Afghanistan, to kind of they said that he was exploiting Afghanistan people who were trying to
mhm,
leave and flee the Taliban takeover, when in actuality he was running an operation based off of like an expertise that he had in a market that clearly was asking for his services. So he sued them for defamation and I think won 5 million recently. So I think it just speaks to the moment that we're in terms of like how the public relates to the mainstream media, and clearly there's a lot of animosity there. So I
mhm.
think that, you know, this is just a manifestation of that shift away toward the mainstream from the mainstream media.
Yeah, and I like the idea of being able to say my opinion and kind of be more in control of what we're editing and putting out there, like as just two normal people, two Gen Zers, versus I compare it to like my experience within the Vista, our ex college newspaper, and obviously with that, not that Colin and I aren't checking our facts now, but with that, it was like we could not publish things that had any type of leaning one way or the other, especially if it was within news. And there was just a lot of fact checking and stuff like that. And for us here, if we kind of maybe make a mistake, then we'll just kind of mention it the next episode and be like, oh, by the way, this is a correction we have to make. And we're able to say our opinions about whatever we want on here without any type of um, punishment.
And I'm really interested to pick your brain about this because I think when we were writing for the Vista, I kind of came to realize that the things that don't get included are almost as important as the stuff you do end up including in like a, whether it be in the article or just in the entire edition that week. And so you realize that there's a lot of editorial decisions that have to be made on a weekly basis about like this is going in this week's edition, this is not,
Hmm.
this sentence is going in the article, this sentence is not. And even though you can maintain your objectivity when writing news by just sticking to the facts and your sources, I did find that there was that element of subjectivity that you almost couldn't remove from the final product. And that frustrated me a lot. Like we did pretty good, and I don't even have any specific examples in mind, but you just realize that almost like complete objectivity might be not a reality. Like it might not be possible.
Impossible. It feels
Yeah,
like, yeah.
yeah,
A specific example that comes to mind for us is I remember when we published stories about when the conflict between Israel and Gaza first like came out, and we were having to do a bunch of research and write about it and stuff like that because it was very, 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 very mainstream when it first came out too. I do remember the club on campus that was supporting Israel kind of saying some backlash about how we were being biased toward one side, but um, I just remember thinking to myself, I don't think we're being biased. I think we're just stating facts that they don't think is facts, if that makes sense.
yeah. And it gets even messier when you're talking about like a print product because like the way that you lay out the page can have an impact on how people perceive
Yes.
and interpret the story. So like we could be giving equal coverage to like both sides of a conflict, but if we put one of them first and one of them second, then that is like people could interpret that as like a in the hierarchy of how we're arranging the article, do we think that this is more important than this here at the end? So you just like you realize how tricky it really can get. And I think that that for me like made me want to try out this commentary space and just say like, yes, we are subjective beings. I think it's hard to be completely objective. We can try our very, very best, but maybe
Hmm.
putting ourselves to a standard of we're allowed to have our subjective opinion. And in fact, like that might be what we're wanting to put forward. So obviously we're still experimenting with it and figuring things out, but I've enjoyed it so far. It's been fun.
Yeah, I definitely have enjoyed it too. I kind of look forward to not the recording process per se, just because I feel like I get nervous every single time, but having the product afterwards makes me feel like we're doing something, if that makes sense. Like, I love having that physical product afterward. Not that I mean, this is online, but it's just kind of like with the Vista, right? Like, during production, it's very stressful and it's like, are we gonna fill these pages? Blah, 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 blah. But like, once that product is in my hand, I'm like, oh, so this is what I'm doing it for. Like, it's so fun to be able to produce nothing, something from nothing, basically.
Right. Yeah, that is a great feeling. And I definitely have missed like the rush of it where you would show up for production day, which was Tuesdays for us, and like we the thing would the final product would be like somewhat assembled. We'd have all the component pieces. We just needed to like put them in their place. But you know, this feeling of like by the end of the day, we're gonna have 12 to 16 PDFs finalized and ready to go and completed. And I don't exactly know how it's gonna happen from here to here. There's probably gonna be a lot of like ups and downs and undoing things and redoing things and last
Yeah.
minute changes. But like that feeling of like by the time we leave here, there will be something to show for it, and it'll show up on Thursday morning ready to deliver. That I've definitely missed that since graduating, and I think that this podcast has kind of like been an opportunity to feel that in a different way.
Yes, and it also personally holds me accountable to keeping up with the news. Not that I don't think I ever didn't, like, since graduating, but this really makes me accountable for it because I'm like, I can't just come onto this podcast knowing nothing within the past week, and yeah, I can't fake that, you know? So, I don't know, I like it. I like that it's a personal challenge, a creative challenge, and I just like that we're doing this.
Yeah, exactly the same here. So on that note, do you want to jump
Yes.
into our executive orders from Trump this week?
Yes. Um, a lot has happened this week, guys. I feel like even last week our episode we were referencing lightly some of the beginning orders, but we were like, we can't even talk about it because we were talking about so much last week that we're like, we need to dedicate its own episode to this. The first order that we're going to be talking about is the Jan 6 pardons that Trump made. Colin, do you have any specific feelings about this?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me is that just the fact that when he was on the campaign trail, Trump was saying that he would pardon on a case-by-case basis. Just saying like he would probably pardon the nonviolent people, and pardon people who maybe just like were at the Capitol building but not didn't go inside, people who were there to protest and not be violent. But he was insinuating that he wouldn't just blanket pardon everyone, that he would make those distinctions. And I think that that's what was warranted. Like I think he should have sat down and actually looked at the charges against certain people who, like, some were convicted of like seditious conspiracy. And I think that like those people are in a very different position, and maybe deserve, you know, I think that
More
maybe some of
investigation.
their punishment was warranted. I don't know
Yes.
they deserve the exact sentence that they got. That should certainly be up for debate. Um, But yeah, I don't know. I just wish that there had been more of an effort to make that distinction. And also, JD Vance on the campaign trail kind of said similar things where he said that he thought that the violent protesters should not be pardoned, whereas the violent, whereas the nonviolent ones should be pardoned. But then Vance kind of had to backpedal a little bit after Trump issued this blanket pardon and say like, "Oh, actually, I support the president and his actions," and it seemed a little bit not genuine to me.
Yeah, I definitely think that especially the violent protesters should not be pardoned. I I have trouble putting my shoes or myself into people's shoes because nowadays I feel that every time I'm maybe engaging in a story or whatever, I really try my best to put myself in these people's shoes and like practice empathy. But for this, it just these people are just so brainwashed. Like I listened to an interview, I think it was probably on the Daily, where a Jan 6 writer agreed to be interviewed, and he was like talking about how he was like on the run. This was before Trump was inaugurated, and just the way that he talked about approaching it, he's like, yeah, and then there was I saw a message about a protest and it was going to be peaceful and all this stuff, but then everyone started walking in and I was like curious, so I just stumbled inside and I don't know, I just find it so hard to believe that people just thought they were allowed to, like, walk into the White House like that, I don't know.
Or rather the Capitol building, you mean?
Oh, yeah, sorry,
Yeah.
Capitol building.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of competing narratives about what actually happened. And like from my perspective, I'm willing to listen to all of the competing narratives, but I also think that the law is the law, and if you break the law, then it doesn't really matter what your narrative is as you're doing it. Like I think there's a I don't know if this is actually written into the law somewhere, but like ignorance of the law isn't necessarily an excuse. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I don't know. I just wish that it had been, like I said, more like case by case and um, like let people express like the dude on the podcast, like let him express what his view of that day was, and maybe by like sifting through all of the different perspectives, we can arrive at a better sense of what actually happened. I'm hoping that like maybe some of the pardoned people can like shed some light about what was going through their head as they were like inside the building and committing different actions in the building. But I also kind of have my doubts because I feel like a lot of the people who went inside and started like destroying things were kind of the types of people who like don't really know how to communicate. And so I kind of have my
Mhm.
I kind of have my doubts about like how effective they're gonna be post release at like conveying their thought process about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wanna touch a bit about what you said about the law is a law. I think it's really important to recognize that too, because everything that happens sets a precedent for what's gonna happen in the future, right? And I I do think that the rule of the law is something that needs to be preserved. It's a foundation of democracy, and if we go about kind of excusing this and having more scenarios in which we don't do a case by case basis, and it sets a precedent that that's just not a thing anymore, and I think that's very disheartening.
Yeah, and it kind of speaks to like the growing power of the pardon in general and how we've seen it be expanded in the past like month or 2 months, starting with, Biden pardoning a whole host of people, including his son and his family and Fauci and like all of that. And he pardoned, I think, like a lot of the death row federal, the people on federal death row also. So, like, that was an expansion on his way out of office, but then going into office, we see Trump doing the same thing, like expanding.
Mhm.
Initially, the pardon is meant um, to give grace to people who actually feel remorse for the wrong that they've done, or people who are falsely targeted and prosecuted and convicted. And I don't really know that that applies to the J6 crowd. I think a lot of them are very much publicly shown committing the various acts that they did, and they also show no remorse. So it's like, is this what the pardon is really meant for? It seems like it's a pretty big departure from the norms of what a pardon should be.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that too.
Which I
Should
don't know
be
if you have
too.
anything else about J6, but that kind of goes to recently with Ross Ulbricht as well being pardoned.
Mm.
Well, first, did you have anything else about J6?
No, I was gonna ask you about this next topic, actually.
Okay. So Ross Ulbricht was pardoned also, which Trump said that he was going to do on his first couple of days, and he did. But Ross Ulbricht was this guy who started the Silk Road, like this dark web website where people could go, and it was mostly like buying drugs, I think. I don't really know the like what you could get from Silk Road, but it was a lot of drugs. I think you could also like order hits on people and other crazy stuff like this. And so the FBI and other intelligence agencies were like trying to figure out who's behind the Silk Road. They got it down to the
Mhm.
username, the Dread Pirate Roberts, and then eventually were able to like kind of trace it through the usual means of intelligence, but they also kind of did like a sting operation that resulted in them arresting Ulbricht with pretty solid evidence, like he was the Dread Pirate Roberts behind all of this. So he went to prison with 2 life sentences plus 40 years, I believe. And their reasoning being that during the sting operation, they had kind of put him in a position where they're like, we'll kill this guy for you if you just say the word. And Ulbricht allegedly was on board with this idea proposed by the intelligence people. And so they kind of, some people argued that like, oh, it was entrapment. Like they set him up to violate the law
Yeah.
by saying he wanted a hit done on this person. And the person was never actually killed. So that's another like reason why people think that Ross is innocent. However, my take on it is he's not exactly innocent if he was running this operation, allegedly.
Yeah,
And
because
if
yeah.
he, and also if people died as a result of what was sold on Silk Road, which I think they've traced at least 6 overdose deaths to
Yeah.
drugs bought on Silk Road. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on all of that? And like if he was a good candidate who should have been pardoned?
Um, Based off of everything you just said, like I said, I didn't do too much research on this topic in particular, but I again don't think that I think that pardoning him was definitely just Trump kind of keeping his word, right? Like I just think that he again should have been another case that was looked more into and not just pardoned. I think it confuses me a little bit when it comes to, again, like we were just talking about, the power of the pardon. I think that it has gotten a little bit out of control. And I think that his example is just one of them.
Yeah, and there's a really good episode for anyone interested in this topic. There's this YouTuber, Bailey Sarian, who I really love. She she does this show called Dark History where she kind of like dives into these like taboo topics. So she had an episode diving into the dark web, episode 41. So if anyone's interested, I totally recommend going and listening to that. But that's all
Wait,
that.
I'll go listen to that.
Yeah. Okay. Any
Okay,
other
so
executive order stuff going on?
let's talk about Trump's immigration and deportation orders. Colin, do you have any specific thoughts on those first?
Yeah, I didn't do a ton of research about this one particularly, but I know that he has essentially declared a national emergency at the southern border because of the influx of immigration under Biden. The deportations have already kind of started. I've definitely seen videos circulating of people being arrested.
Mm-hmm.
One of them allegedly like a Haitian immigrant. Um, and so this mass deportation thing is not, it seems like it's not just talk that Trump was kind of like the other promises that Trump's made. Like we've really seen him kick into gear, into action, even within the first couple of days that he really is intending to enact what he said he would. So that could mean potential mass deportations.
When it comes to border security, I do think that that's important, right? But I feel that the way it's being handled is, again, like pretty overly harsh to me. I think that a lot of the policies like this mass deportation is just kind of Trump like keeping his promises basically, which isn't a good thing in my opinion. Um, I acknowledge the need for secure borders, but I do think that there's a more humane way to do it. Um, and and I think that him doing this is showing kind of an unnecessarily cruel actions and is just eliciting more fear in people when I don't think that should be the case. I think there's a lot of misinformation going around too about this in particular. I've seen a lot of videos too. Um, and in regard to the misinformation, like the birthright order and whatnot, that's really scary. I remember looking up, is Trump able to do this? Which I don't think he is. And how people were saying that it's not that he wants to do that in particular, but more so just stop um, birth tourism, which is kind of when people come in and on vacation from outside countries and come in and plan their pregnancy to give birth within the US so that they can get like citizenship or whatever. I'm not really sure about how common that is per se, but I feel like looking into that is something that I need to do a little more research on. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that was all sort of baked into his immigration executive orders with the end to birthright citizenship. And that was something that was blocked by a judge in Seattle who said, he said something along the lines of, this was the most unconstitutional paper that ever came across my desk.
Oh,
Specifically because obviously the 14th Amendment establishes birthright citizenship. And that was something that was done um, in the aftermath of slavery to ensure that people whose ancestors were slaves were given citizenship, and it was just a way of securing that. So the
mhm,
fact that now they're kind of like going back on birthright citizenship is a little bit questionable. Like you
right.
said, they might be justifying it by saying there's too much birth tourism going on or whatnot, but I would have to look at the exact numbers of like how, like you said, how common is that really? Um, and as far as immigration more broadly goes, I feel like I feel like a lot of the rhetoric used on the campaign trail was pretty vile. I thought
Yes.
it was very demonizing of immigrants, and there's political motivations for doing that. It's a hot button issue, so it gets people very stirred up. And I feel like with Trump, there's this pattern of like he doesn't really care how stirred up people get as long as they get stirred up and are on board with what he's saying.
Right.
And so that troubles me a lot. I think anytime that we're looking at like a group or population, subpopulation within the US and like scapegoating or demonizing them, it's wrong. Um, for me personally, I think we should have a lot more immigration from countries, people seeking refugee status from South America,
Yes.
Latin America. What I am a little bit more worried about is there was a trend of people being sent by like China and their government up through South America, Latin America, all the human trafficking that goes on, and some have argued that there could be that national security threat if people are being sent by their foreign government to enter our country illegally, and that would open us up to security risks. And really, when it comes to immigration, like that's the only immigration that I wouldn't like welcome and think positively about.
Yes, I agree with that as well. I think, yeah, again, I want to touch again on Trump kind of being that hot, like clicking on the hot topic issues. I think for him, and he presses good press, right? Like he truly is one of the most like I
Manipulative.
want to say like one of them, yeah, like he's so I I always joke to people like Colin, and other people who we used to work with, like within the Vista, that I'm so glad we weren't this year, particularly just because I would hate to have to write about Trump over and over and over again, and that's like what he wants, right? And it just sucks because when you work in an environment like news or like the Vista, like not particularly this setup because like again we're independent commentators, we can choose and pick like whatever we want to talk about. But when it comes to working within like print journalism or the news, like you kind of have to report on this. Like it's not something you can avoid, which is why I'll joke pretty often and be like, I'm really glad that we didn't have to work within the past year at the newspaper because I would have hated having to do like election coverage and all this Trump coverage, which is so necessary, but I just wouldn't like it, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, and I think they did a fantastic job last year on
Right.
the paper of covering it, but I agree, like it would have been a really tall order, and I just like if like we were always told don't write PR for anybody under any circumstance, but when you're covering Trump, everything he does feels like PR.
It's
And
PR.
so it was like this constant battle of like, okay, like he just did something really big and like this is going to impact a lot of people, but it feels like a PR stunt. So like, how do we cover it without giving it more credence than it rightly deserves? And all of this was like a constant conversation that I think has been playing out in many newsrooms across the country for like 8 years now. And I find it kind of exhausting, but I've accepted it and like this is where we are. He's the president. He needs to be covered as any other president would. And
Hmm.
that's where we are.
Yeah, that's where we are. Well, I agree with you that they did a good job of covering it. I kind of glanced a little bit about what the Vista's been doing this past year over the this past week. Um, and yeah, again with what they have, and the good part about this is that they'll always have news to write, right? Like sometimes with the news, like especially in a college paper, I feel like you are like, what are we going to write about this week? But with Trump, it's like you always have a story to write about. Um, we can keep talking about some of his executive orders. This next one, him pulling out of the Paris Agreement and his kind of um, rollbacks on environmental protections and policies and the promotion of his of fossil fuels with like the drill baby drill thing. Like I will fully admit I am very left-leaning when it comes to the environment. I literally, like, stopped eating meat to, minimize my personal carbon footprint, and I just wanna say that all of this is just so very, very dangerous in my opinion. I hate that the climate crisis and global warming has become so politicized when I truly, truly think that it shouldn't be when us as a world and as humans are all a part of this issue. Um, yeah, I could talk on and on about this because again, I'm very left leaning when it comes to this issue, and I think we can have balance have um and still make or still balance the economic side versus the environmental policy side, right? Like I don't like how with this we are prioritizing corporations more so than our environment and like what's happening to the world and global warming.
We left off talking about the Paris Climate Accord, and Abby, you were saying that it's frustrating how people pit environmentalism against the economic side of things.
Yes, I do think there can be a balance. And also with Trump withdrawing out of the Paris Agreement, that is so, so disheartening to me too. And I think that like people who are more right leaning could argue like, oh, this is a power move, like all that stuff. But I honestly think it does the opposite. It shows this kind of isolation from the rest of the world that I just don't personally agree with. I think that I don't think that was right of him to do. And I can't believe it happened like within his first week of presidency. I'm not surprised, but it's just kind of like comical at this point.
For me, it bothers me when anything is declared an emergency. I kind of see it as like a pretext to change things like very rapidly without a lot of explanation. And like obviously they did this with, well, he did it with immigration, he did it with energy. They did it in 2020 with COVID, and just like this idea of like declaring emergency so that you kind of have unchecked authority and ability to say what goes and what doesn't. That bothers me in and of itself. And I think a lot of the money that we spend on these emergency topics should be more closely scrutinized. And, you know, it should all really come down to Congress, who has the power to create budgets and
Mhm.
whatnot. Like they should be the ones having that power.
Yes, I agree. Um, yeah, I agree with that. Do you have any other thoughts about, um, this segment of Trump's EOs?
No, not so much about environmental side. So we can probably talk briefly about some of the other ones. We had um, he signed one to declassify all of the information about RFK Sr.'s assassination, JFK, and then MLK Jr. So I think we'll be getting the bulk of the documents, which presumably are with the National Archives, is what I heard. They'll be coming up with a plan to release them to the general public. You saw members of all the different families weighing in, saying, like, we want to see the documents before they go public. Whether or not Trump will abide by that, like, I don't know, we'll see. But also, there's a very real possibility that nothing really comes of this.
Mhm.
I heard, I think it was Ben Shapiro was comparing this to Geraldo Rivera, the vault. He's like, I'm at Al Capone's vault. What are we going to find inside? And there was nothing inside. So we'll have to see. But there is now the ball is in motion, and within, I think they said 45 days, they'll have to have released it if there is anything substantive.
Yes. I guess we'll see what happens with that. I honestly just think it's like him Trump doing this is kind of just adding some like layer of conspiracy or like I don't know. I just feel like some people are coming out with like some theories and whatnot, and I mean like I have nothing to say about it until it's released. So there's just like this air of like weird like secrecy or something like that. Um which I find
Okay.
a little bit entertaining.
But I
Okay.
think this is completely my opinion. What the hell do I know? I think that LBJ might have had something to do with JFK's death. But I feel like there's more to the JFK LBJ relationship than has ever been explained. And LBJ, obviously becoming president after JFK
Hmm.
stood to benefit from JFK disappearing. So I don't really have any concrete, tangible proof, but I've always just had like this weird feeling about LBJ. I think he was a really, not a, I don't think he was a great character. I don't think he was a great president. And it wouldn't shock me if there was something to come out about him.
Yeah, that weird feeling. It might be our watchdog gut instinct that our advisor used to always tell us to follow. So we'll see if that has any validity to it when it's released. So
And the other leading theory just being like something with the mob. JFK's dad was very involved with, I think, Boston and Chicago mob ties. And so who knows if they had like some vendetta against JFK, who I think was trying to actually clean up some of the mob activity that happened in those cities. So
mhm.
yeah, yet to be seen.
Yeah, yet to be seen. I definitely think, again, like I said, like this isn't anything super political, but what I'm about to say. But I just find entertainment within conspiracy theories. I try not to run with them personally, but I am fairly entertained by things like that. So that's all I can say about like what's come out about that so far. So I used to have a political science teacher who used to always say that the politics is the best reality TV, and I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, and JFK in particular, I think people kind of wash over his legacy because of how tragically he died. But if he had lived, there was a lot of stuff that probably would have come out about him that people would not have liked, from like affairs to more affairs. So we'll see. Yeah, another EO that happened was. Do you see any more on our doc there?
Um, Ending DEI in hiring in federal
Right.
government. I I think that this is a very important one to come out. More so, like, put aside the DEI thing, people just, like, losing their jobs, like, that's, like, I mean, I haven't seen anyone personally lose their job yet, but I did have a friend, who received an email at her company talking about how they're going to have to look into this as of, Trump's orders, and I was kind of doing a little bit of gossiping at my office temp job the other day. Not gossiping, we were just chit-chatting, but one of my coworkers also works within the federal government. Like she temps with me at the office job, but also like separately has a different job. And so I was just like, oh, like how has that been? Have you like heard anything about it? And she also said that she received like kind of like a company wide email and how um, these positions will be affected immediately, basically. And I don't know. It just seems this it seems very vague within like when everything's going to be going down or like what they could possibly do to not have it be infected. And yeah, that's just my opinion about this from a people losing job perspective. Colin, what about you? What have you kind of formed opinions about when it comes to this topic?
I don't have a ton to say personally. I do think, like all of the other executive orders that we've seen come down, they're very like shocking on their face, but not
Right.
surprising. I just think that that's kind of the thread among all these EOs is like we could have. He said he was going to do this, so we can't really reasonably be that surprised.
Right.
And also, we've seen like the way that the culture has been trending, and it's been away from DEI. Like in our last semester at the Vista, our assistant news editor wrote an article about like is DEI on its way out or something like this. And so it's been trending out, and from that perspective, again, it's not really a surprise, but I do think, like all these other EOs, maybe these are issues that warrant like more comprehensive dialogue and conversation as opposed to just like signing a piece of paper and that's the new law of the land kind of deal.
Mm-hmm.
Especially due to the sensitive nature of some of these topics, and as you said, the impact that it has down the line on people. So I would like to see like all of these issues that we've talked about handled in a legislative way as opposed
Me
to
too.
order.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think also in regard to DEI itself, I think that there is this argument that within like the realm of like things like DEI or like critical race theory and stuff like that, and like the need for like restrictions on them, I think that's wrong, personally. But I think there's this argument that like when you have stuff like this implemented within like say a company or school or education, that it is kind of indoctrinating people to be more liberal. And I don't really buy that argument in per se, just because I'm going to speak from my own experience. I feel like I first went to college like very wide-eyed and super super left, and I don't like the argument that like college makes you more liberal, because I so disagree with that. I honestly think college made me more moderate in regard to just kind of once you learn all these things, right? Like you kind of just form your own opinion on things, versus like when I first came in, I kind of was like reposting everything I saw about like the left side and not really doing my own research and stuff like that. And like now that I've graduated, I'm very much I'm definitely left leaning. I feel like that's very obvious, but I do feel that I'm more centered and willing to listen to multiple sides and prioritize the unity of our country, where I didn't prioritize that before. And that might also be because of the unique experiences that I got to have as well, like the opportunities that I got to travel. I think traveling really, really opens your eyes as an American. I had never been abroad until college, and I really, really thought that made me more personally moderate as well, just because listening to the rest of the world and having that diversity impacts you in a way that makes you balance out your opinions more. That's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, yeah, I totally think that that makes sense, and I obviously agree. I think diversity is a great thing, and diversity of opinion is really something that I value and want to bring to any situation. I think that the way that it is brought to into conversation does matter a bit. So, like, is it going to be a government level thing? Is it going to be like a corporation, like your business, or are people like my preference is always that people take it upon themselves as individuals to have conversations even when they're difficult, and that is sort of like how ideas emerge and enter into the zeitgeist as opposed to I don't know anytime I feel like any idea is sort of being injected, it does make me more skeptical and resistant to it no matter what it is. um,
Hmm.
so for me when it comes to like DEI policy, I just wish that it was something that could happen more organically as opposed to needing to be mandated, if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, this just came to mind when you were talking about this. Within the Vista, I remember we kind of had a conversation within our exec board and with our advisor about like having a DEI position and like having somebody to facilitate that stuff. And I remember, I mean, I was for it. I wasn't like taking the lead on it or anything, but I do remember our advisor, who is much older, not much older, but like she's older than us. She's in a different generation than us. Um, Kind of not really understanding or getting it, but she was kind of just like, "Yeah, do what you guys want." And it never ended up actually happening, just because we got super super busy within the paper and the work itself. But and I also think that as a staff and as college students, we were already having those conversations to begin with. So yeah, I think that I would like to think that it could all happen organically, and individuals putting this on for themselves, but I don't think in reality it always comes to that way. Like, I don't think in reality everyone is coming from empathy and trying to include diversity and whatnot. But I do think in our space that happened very organically, and we were all individuals who were willing to listen to one another and see multiple perspectives, which is good.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. That's all that I have for that for right now, but I do think we eventually might try to reach out and talk to some people who, let's say they lose their job,
Hmm.
at DEI or because of this new EO. Like, I would like to talk to those people and hear what they have to say, because I think that that perspective will be super interesting. Uh,
Hmm.
but as of right now, I think we can go to our next topic. We got through the EOs, sort of.
Finally.
We just, we just hit some highlights. I'm sure there's more that
Yeah.
we missed, but for now, just a quick update on Pete Hegseth because we've been talking about him for a couple weeks. He was confirmed by a vote in the Senate, so now he is the head of the Department of Defense, and essentially, it was a close vote, and there's 53 Republicans in the Senate. 50 of them voted. I think it was 50 voted in favor of him, and then there was a tie breaking that had to happen with JD Vance breaking that tie. So the senators who didn't vote to approve him were McConnell, Murkowski, and Collins. And those are sort of more of like the independent moderate people anyway, plus McConnell, who probably has his own like bone to pick potentially with like Trump. And I don't really know what his explanation would be for not voting with the other Republicans. That would be interesting to know. But yeah, so Pete Hegseth got voted in, and there was sort of this like last ditch um, allegations that came out from his ex sister in law, saying that Pete had behaved abusively toward his second wife, Samantha. I just wanted to like make clear that Pete has denied all those allegations and also denied all the allegations we spoke about last week as well. So, oh, and also his second wife, Samantha, denied this round of allegations from the ex sister-in-law.
Mm.
But that's kind of the state of it, and that was the big talk leading up to the actual vote to confirm him. So yeah, do you think I missed anything on that, Abby?
No, you covered that really well. Yeah, I'm excited, or maybe excited is too strong a word. I'm curious to see how he does. I do, again, like last week we talked a lot about character, and I definitely still agree with that. Obviously he had denied all these allegations. But it just, again, like, I have to think to myself, it says something when so many women around you kind of come out and say this stuff. It's like it's hard for me to believe that there's like a personal vendetta versus a pattern, is what I want to say about that.
Yeah, I totally agree, and we probably could go on like for literally 15, 30 minutes on just that alone, but I totally agree with it. Um, I think we'll wait and see how his time in
Yeah.
power goes, and as these things potentially come up more and more, which it wouldn't surprise me if they continue to crop up. Um, then we'll definitely talk about them and cover it. But
Yes.
just wanted to give that update about him, and as well, Kristi Noem was also confirmed for the Department of Homeland Security. Um, that one I feel like was kind of an interesting pick, like a interesting role for her to be in. I'm not sure what about Kristi Noem like screams Homeland Security, but
Homeland Security. It
maybe
did
it
seem
was
kind of
when
random to
she
me
maybe it
too.
was when she shot her dog to death. I don't know, but that was in her autobiography. She had told this story about this misbehaving dog it was a misbehaving puppy, I'll add, who she had to put down after it ran after and killed a bunch of chickens. And basically, terrible PR move by her you know,
Yeah,
everyone was like, I can't believe this. Like, she put this in her own autobiography. Um, yeah, so maybe Trump or someone else in the administration read that and was like, Homeland Security, we need her for
we need that energy in Homeland Security.
now they
Yeah.
got it. So
Yeah, only time will tell again with stuff like that, but thanks for the update on that. Colin, um,
yeah,
you're going to a
thinking
hearing,
about
right?
it.
Which hearing did you decide to go to?
Okay, so I have a really busy week this week, but I would like to either go see RFK Jr.'s hearing or Tulsi Gabbard's hearing. I think Gabbard's will be the one to miss. Like, I think there'll be a lot of things lobbed at her, and she'll have to really
Mhm.
be thinking fast. So I'd really love to go see that, but it is a busy day for me, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to.
Okay.
But either way, I mean, we're going to be watching it remote if not, if I can't go in person. So we'll talk about that probably next week as well.
Yes. Should we move on to the next topic,
Yeah.
or do you have anything else to say?
No, that's it for me. And the next topic is the temporary ceasefire and hostage deal between Hamas and Israel. So this ceasefire was first announced January 15th, and I have a BBC article pulled up that I'm going to reference just because it's such a complicated topic.
Right.
Essentially, there's multiple stages to this ceasefire deal. They've been at war for 15 months now. Um, they've agreed to stop fighting for, I think, 42 days. Hamas will release a total of 33 hostages, women, including female soldiers, children, some older men, and sick. And Israel will release about 1,900 Palestinian prisoners. Israel will leave the populated areas in the Gaza Strip. Displaced Palestinians can return to their neighborhoods. There'll be more aid shipments coming into Gaza. And yeah, so we have seen three, I think so far we saw three Israeli hostages get released. And then in exchange, there was 90 Palestinian prisoners released. And then I think they just recently released four more Israeli hostages who had been, I think, IDF soldiers, and they were women.
Mhm.
That was the latest I heard about it. It's obviously kind of on shaky ground, but this is like the first movement that we've really seen toward peace. Um,
Yeah.
I don't have much
Yeah.
commentary on it, but I do think it's interesting. People are talking about who deserves the credit for this. Was it Biden, his administration on the way out, making this like deal, or was it Trump's rhetoric leading up to his inauguration, saying that there would be hell to pay unless everyone was released by his inauguration?
I also don't have much commentary to add on this too. I am really curious to see what is going to happen next in regard to maybe a more stable deal or what's going to be happening in that realm, especially um, as now we're in Trump's presidency. So I'm really curious to see what's going to happen in regard to that with all the context now.
Yeah, and since the war started, some 47,000 Palestinians have died, and that's just
Yeah,
an insane amount of people. It's horrible, terrible humanitarian situation. So I think
I agree.
it's great that now under Biden, but now under Trump especially, they're very much wanting to make a peace deal, and that deal is actively being brokered by the U.S., Qatar, Hamas and Israel themselves. So I don't know. I think a lot of people feel cautiously optimistic that we are on the brink
Hmm.
of a more lasting peace. There's a lot of things. I mean, this conflict, the ramifications of it are going to play out well beyond our own lifetime, it feels like. Um,
Yes, I agree with that.
I mean, it feels like there's going to be like semi-permanent damage done on both sides, and so I'm just gonna take a backseat and hope that this peace actually endures.
That was really well said. I completely agree with everything you just said. Um, cautiously optimistic was a really good way that you described that as well too. Shall we
So
move
yeah,
on?
we'll bring updates on that as well as it continues. We have some other topics to get to. Our bonus topics this week. Abby has some updates on the Blake Lively, Justin Baldoni situation. So go ahead, Abby.
Yes. So I think it's just before I like get into the updates, I think it's so interesting how much our generation is eating this lawsuit up. It like really truly does remind me a lot about Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard. And Colin and I were texting a bit about it, and we were like, I think Colin had texted me something like, "Oh, like America's in a chokehold about this," or something like that. And I was just like, I literally think it's because of the celebrity attachment to it, which I mean, valid. But yeah, Candace Owens had kind of called out Ryan Reynolds as being like a leading force behind what had happened, which I don't find it as all too surprising if that's true. I think a lot of people have taken this. Just a mini update too about this is that now Justin Baldoni is suing Blake and Ryan as well, not just for or not just the New York Times, but also them as people. Um, I forgot that we didn't mention that last week, but I think it's really interesting to see all of these people kind of come out and reference Ryan and Blake's relationship like really, really um intimately and detailed. Like people on social media seem to be rallying around Justin Baldoni. He has definitely won in the court of public opinion. I still personally don't think he's going to win his defamation case just because it is so hard to prove defamation against like major media, right? Like, I just don't think he's going to win against the New York Times. But he has won in the court of public opinion as of now. People are going back to Blake and Ryan's relationship. People are kind of flipping on them. I was telling Colin earlier before we hopped on our call to record the Zoom that um, people have been taking their social media interactions and kind of calling it more of a humiliation ritual. Like if any of you listeners know about Blake and Ryan's relationship, is they're kind of known for being this like fun, sarcastic, like bantery couple who kind of like make fun of each other online. Ryan more so than Blake, I'll say, but they really do feed off of each other's like common energy. And in the beginning, I always felt that people kind of looked at this couple and were like, yes, like there are such goals and like they really get each other and they really, I love like the playful banter. But now it's really, really telling to see people flip so fast and analyze these same once cute interactions as now a humiliation ritual and like kind of taking that step. And for me, when I look at this case, I'm really, really trying not to engage in analyzing either of them in their past as well, just because there's a lot to be said about these things. And again, social media and people can frame it so differently, right? Like at one point it was cute, but now it's like humiliation. And yeah, I guess that's just my update there. I think it's really interesting how people are perceiving this case and how much people are interested in it. For sure that something went down for sure, just because I can't imagine as a celebrity going into this and suing just because you have a personal vendetta against somebody, because it is literally ruining people's reputations. Like being in the limelight in this way for celebrities in particular and public facing people in particular, like I can't imagine you wanting to do this for any reason other than, or for any reason of the sort of like just bringing someone down. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I just don't see that, because you're bringing yourself down way more. Like people, your reputation is being ruined and your craft isn't being looked at, but more so you as a person is. And I don't think that's what they would want.
Yeah, so I also I don't know if you listened to Candace Owens' episode or not, but we certainly texted about it, and I think she was sort of bringing this to the table that like there was jealousy going on between Reynolds jealous of Blake and her relationship to Justin, and
Hmm.
how she was kind of insinuating, and she said that she has more information next week to come, but insinuating that there was some situation on set that really drove Reynolds into kind of, again, all of this is allegation, but a jealous state that then he had a personal vendetta against Baldoni and that Blake was kind of like swept up in it. And I don't really know how to feel about this narrative, first of all, because it's still emerging, but second of
Right.
all, because I feel like it sort of takes the agency away from Blake in like her own, I think what I texted you was like in her own ability to cause controversy. like like everyone can be a controversial person on in their own right. Like she doesn't necessarily need her husband like whispering in her ear his own jealousy in order for her to be swept up in these sorts of things, if that is
Right.
what happened. And again, that's what the public opinion seems to be right now. um we'll just have to see how it plays out in court, but I could see the argument that Reynolds was a driving force behind a lot of it, and I could also see the argument that he was just backing her and she was genuinely feeling violated and all the other things that she alleges against Baldoni.
Yeah, what I was telling Colin earlier, and honestly, a lot of people too, when it comes to this, like bringing up how bad of a person Blake and Wright, or like how bad of a person Blake is, blah blah blah. Blah. I, I'm just like, you can be a bad person and also be sexually assaulted. I'm not saying that. I'm not sure. Like with this case, it's still coming about, but I think that you can be two things at once or three things at once. Like everything is super nuanced, right? Like, and so Justin had also released some raw. I think they call them in the film world like dailies, where it's like you have all the raw footage from the day, and Justin's team actually released a video of one of the parts of Blake Lively's case that she was referencing against Justin, and it was one of the cases in which she or situations in which she referenced him kind of improving kissing her on the neck or something like that. And in within that video, it's like kind of a back and forth of like he did kiss her on the neck, but I'm like, and then they start talking about each other's partners, or Justin seems to be kind of making sure that they're talking about each other's partners, and then they're chit chatting, and it's really interesting because they're actors, obviously, and so the words are very they're like fighting words like volatile, like they're definitely arguing, not volatile, that's too strong of a word. They're definitely arguing, but they're acting, so it's like they're smiling and they're like saying things so sweetly because it was supposed to be for like a slow motion montage, so it didn't really matter what they were saying, but there's definitely some tension in the air there, in regard to the struggle of their power. So I don't know. We'll just see what else happens in regard to the rollout of this case.
Yeah, so we got two more topics and like 6 minutes to go, so we'll try to cram them in at the end
Yeah,
here.
sorry.
No, you're all good. So we have the COVID lab leak theory is now being acknowledged by the CIA as the most likely origin of COVID. Um, as anyone knows who's been listening to our episodes, this is one that really, really gets me. And last week I said that I thought that Fauci had a lot to answer for, and I was mad that he got pardoned by Biden. Well, this is what I feel like he has to answer for is the origins of COVID. Because in April of 2020, so 1 month into the pandemic, I was watching and listening to podcasts that were saying that this was leaked from the Wuhan lab which specifically studies COVID viruses, and that it was being funded through like backdoor means by the US and Dr. Fauci and other organizations in the US, funding gain of function research, trying to essentially engineer viruses to be more well, to have a better understanding of how they worked, but really it was like bioengineering and making them more spreadable and lethal. So that is my spiel. This has already been acknowledged that it likely came from a lab from other government entities, different subcommittees in Congress. They've had hearings. It's, this is more than I would say it's more than just a theory that it came from the lab, but now the CIA is acknowledging this is the most likely origin.
Yes, that is so it's so funny, like, that this is so interesting to me after last week when we were literally just talking about how Biden's pardons, like, I just, like, took pity on him. It just seemed so, like, he was just afraid of being retaliated against once Trump came into presidency, so, yeah, I'm glad we got to touch on this in the bonus round too, and I know that
So,
Colin, you feel really passionately about
like,
this too.
I want to know, when did Dr. Fauci first begin to suspect it likely came from a lab, if ever? And when did he begin to suspect that? And how did that drive the way that he handled the pandemic and the PR around it? Because I think
Mhm.
if he knew early on, if true that it came from a lab, if he knew that early on and was still spreading the narrative that it came naturally from a wet market, um, that is
So wrong.
seriously wrong for on so many levels. So I'll just leave it at that. We'll see.
We'll
feel like
see if it unravels a little more too.
all right. So the other story being the Department of Government Efficiency was being co-run by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk, and recently Vivek stepped away to pursue the governorship in Ohio. So, just wondering if you had any thoughts on that, Abby.
No, I feel like you can take the lead on this topic.
Okay, so it seems like Politico was reporting that Vivek was kind of shoved aside, and I forget what their exact headline was, but it was something like, oh, here it is. Everyone wants him out. How Musk helped boot Ramaswamy from DOGE, and it's just sort of this. The article basically is saying that no one could stand Ramaswamy, that they found him to be annoying, and that he was butting heads with Musk about the issue of the H-1B visas, and Musk was saying we need more H-1Bs, and Vivek was saying no, and that this issue in and of itself was enough to cause this splintering and the, I don't know. We'll see if DOGE continues on, but Ramaswamy was a big mover in it. So now that he's gone, I don't know. Like it might not accomplish what it initially set out to. I hope that it does because I think it had good aims, but yeah.
That is the last of our topics, I think, right?
Yeah, I think so. So, just a little bit in conclusion, I wanted to say that last week we had talked a little bit about why we were doing this podcast and our sort of reasons and motivations for it. But then I started thinking about ways that we could define whether or not we were succeeding or not. And I think two things. I would really like if people from Gen Z would approach us with stories that we can report, we can interview them,
Yes.
and we can even break stories that Gen Z is involved in and cares about. So if we can get that going in any way, shape, or form, I feel like that would be a success. And also, if we can have people eventually later down the line come back to us and say that they listened to our podcast and they really were motivated by our stories about all that we took away from student journalism, and that in some way that motivated them to go into student journalism also, then that would be a huge win. And as long as
Such
we
a huge
can,
win.
yeah, if we can achieve those two things, I feel like I'll be happy.
Yes. And we will be launching some social media soon. I feel like this project has been like a little bit of a rollout, but yeah, if anyone has any recommendations for us, you could email us at our what's our email again? Sorry.
It's a washedupweekly@gmail.com.
Okay, and less than a minute left. Washed up out.
Yeah.
See you guys next week.
See you next week.